The sound of the diesel engine fades down the hill, restoring the reliable silence of cemeteries everywhere. It is the kind of silence that seeps into and settles a body. Catherine inhales it, parses it with her nose for hints of spring, leans into its peace-filled generosity. Billy stands beside her, facing the opposite direction, peering into the woods at the back of the cemetery. He can make out the bear now, a block of darkness lingering in the shadows 10 feet beyond the tree line. Bears are like memories. We mistakenly think hibernation means they are completely asleep, as if in a coma, but they aren't. Even on the longest, darkest winter nights, bears, and lost memories, continue to stir in their dens. They just sleep longer in winter, opening an eye now and then, anticipating spring.
So welcome to a conversation with Jocelyn Bell and David Giuliano. My name is Heather Campbell, and I'm the owner and publisher of Latitude 46 Publishing, based in Sudbury, Ontario. I want to thank Ben McNally Books for partnering with us on this author talk. They have copies of the book, and they're a wonderful old school bookstore in the heart of Toronto. So happy to have them supporting books and magazines. So you can find both of Broadview and the Undertaking of Billy Buffone at the bookstore. So we're glad that you're joining us virtually. That is the way of the world these days. And it also means that David, who is based in Marathon, Ontario, and Jocelyn, who's based in Toronto, can get together on a Wednesday evening and have a chat with us. So I'm glad everyone is able to join us together, wherever you're from. I do believe it is a one-of-a-kind conversation between these two, and they, as editor-publisher of a magazine and as an author, they get to talk to us about how important storytelling is. So especially how important it is in this digital world as storytelling becomes more and more important to us. And I'm looking forward to them unpacking the power of storytelling for all of us and how we understand ourselves. So note, there is a Q&A afterwards. And so if you're familiar with Zoom, there is a chat box you can put questions in, and we'll address those towards the end. And then there's a Q&A as well. So I'll watch for both those spots for your questions, and we'll get Jocelyn and David to answer those at the end. So I'm going to hand over the virtual mic, over to David and Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. It's so great to be here, and great to be here with Jocelyn. We spent a lot of time together at the United Church Observer and then Broadview, and it's nice to reconnect. So let me begin by saying I'm David Giuliano, and I'll get a chance to talk a bit more about my novel in a bit, but right now I want to say that as the editor and publisher of Broadview, Jocelyn leads the team at Broadview, which is a magazine about spirituality, social justice, and ethical living. And her position includes everything from developing and editing stories to creating budgets and setting strategies. Jocelyn started working at the magazine in 2006 as a managing editor when the publication was still called the United Church Observer. She became editor and publisher in January 2018, and her proudest accomplishment to date has been the relaunching of the magazine as Broadview in the spring of 2019. In 2020, Jocelyn was awarded the Editor's Grand Prix from the National Magazine Awards, and this year the NMA's named Broadview the best special interest magazine in Canada. So I really want to welcome Jocelyn. I think she's going to be beginning by sharing with us one of her editorials.
Yes, thank you so much for that introduction, David. And yeah, I decided I would read one of my editorials because that's where I write every month in the issue. And I chose a personal one to read this time. Sometimes they're about the magazine and the business of the magazine, but this is a personal one. So it's called Grandma's Illness. My maternal grandmother wasn't like the other adults I knew as a child. She didn't have grown-up responsibilities or ask, how's school? If one of us kids accidentally slammed a door, she'd yell, you jackass, in a flash of fury, and seconds later, cackle with laughter. She spent hours staring out the window, rubbing the dinner plates with a tea towel long after they had dried. All I had by way of explanation were the phrases manic depressive, now called bipolar disorder, and lobotomy. She died when I was 10. There was so much about her I didn't understand. Grandma South came to mind as I read Isaac Warman's feature about intergenerational mental illness in his own family. And that's a story that's in our October-November issue called My Father's Nose, My Mother's Anxiety. Warman asks whether we inherit these disorders or have a predisposition to them. I can't confirm diagnoses, but I'm told others in my family suffered from bipolar disorder as well. My own mom spent her childhood avoiding her mother, who fluctuated between despondency and manic episodes of extravagant shopping. As a girl, my mom didn't often feel her mother's love, so she would look at the baby book her mom had made, reassuring herself that surely this was proof of affection. Grandma South lived in a time before medications for mental health disorders. She had shock therapy and detested it. A Toronto psychiatrist visited their home, my mother recalls, and recommended a lobotomy. The procedure involves severing the nerve pathways from one or more lobes of the brain to other areas. The first experiments began in the 1880s, but it wasn't until the mid-1930s and 40s that this method to calm deeply distressed people became popular. By 1952, an estimated 50,000 patients in the United States and Canada had been lobotomized, the majority of them women. Soon after, the procedure began to fall out of favor with the development of antipsychotics and antidepressants. Although this drastic surgery relieved some symptoms, the costs were too high. Patients like my grandmother, who had the surgery in the late 1940s, were left with completely altered personalities, impulsive, inert, unable to concentrate, emotionally blunted. Still, Grandma South carried on. The woman I met decades later seemed content. She loved the Tommy Hunter show. She was a regular at Grace United in Thornbury, Ontario, and she held her own at the euchre table. She enjoyed a big party and a hymn sing. She left lipstick kisses on her cheeks, and she adored my dad, who was very kind to her. Without meaning to, she taught me an early lesson in accepting difference in others. One more thing about Grandma South, her first name was Hope. It might be the most painfully ironic name for a person who suffered as she did. Or perhaps her parents simply intuited what she'd need to persevere through life. In this way, hope suited her perfectly. Thanks.
If we had the little applause emoticons, we'd be offering them now. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for reading that. And I have to say, as a regular reader of Broadview, I always look to the editorial, and I'm always impressed that someone who has to take care of the business end of the operation also is able to keep a very fine work in her writing as part of her work there, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I get to ask some questions now, and hopefully they're ones that folks from the audience tonight, both here on Zoom, but also those watching a live stream, will be wanting to ask as well. And if I don't hit them, you get a chance to ask some of them after your own questions. But you know, I'm really curious because I left the board of Broadview magazine right when of United Church Observer magazine right when Broadview was launching. My term ended, and I've been very curious. How is it going? You know, you changed the magazine name from the United Church Observer to Broadview. Maybe you could start just by telling us why.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I'm both the editor and the publisher. And so I always think of kind of my brain is always sliced. And so I think, you know, both in terms of the publishing and the editorial. So there's a business case and there's an editorial reasoning behind it. So the business case is basically that the Observer had been losing subscribers every year. And when we looked into the numbers, we noticed that we were following basically the same trajectory as the United Church membership, unfortunately. So with churches closing and members aging and passing away, the membership is basically dropping in churches across the country. And it became clear to us that we couldn't keep solely relying on this audience to sustain us over the long term. In fact, our projections show that if we didn't change, we'd be closing in around 2024. This is a few years ago we did this projection. Around the same time, other faith-based magazines like the Presbyterian Record ceased to publish. And so that was a bit of a wake-up call, and we knew we had to do something different. So the question that became so important for us is, how do we stay true to our identity, but also reach people who aren't connected to the United Church? We simply needed more subscribers and new subscribers every year to make up for those we were losing. So that was the business side of the thinking. But the second reason is when we think about our mission. And, you know, if you're a person who's in a church, you've likely heard the question asked, what does it mean to be the church in the 21st century? And you know, it's a big question, and part of the answer, of course, is to serve the membership. But in the 21st century, in a church, the answer also involves outreach in the community, partnership with nonprofit groups, interfaith dialogue, you know, grappling with racism and reconciliation, trying to be a voice for progressive Christian values in the public sphere. So when I ask myself, what does it mean to be a church magazine in the 21st century? I come up with similar answers. So yes, we want to continue to serve the church membership and tell United Church stories, because this is the place for those kinds of stories. But we also need to reach out and tell other stories, and we want to bring that progressive Christian perspective to the national dialogue. We want people from all walks of life to engage with these stories. And so, you know, our vision for Broadview is a magazine that serves United Church members and also engages people beyond the church.
Well, you know, I imagine there's a lot of other changes that were involved to make that happen. Not just that changing the name wouldn't change a lot. Can you tell us a bit more about what other changes were involved in becoming Broadview?
Yeah, there's so many changes, and it's almost like a domino effect. When you change one thing, and then you have to change the next thing and the next thing. It just necessitates a lot of other things. And so I just first of all want to commend the staff, because there's a lot of upheaval and they were fabulous with problem solving and getting us there. So we completely redesigned the magazine. We had a new editorial strategy and we added sections. We made the magazine more pages. We needed a whole new website, a whole new web strategy, and a social media strategy was changed. So that was different. On the business side, kind of the back end, like I call it, we have a new subscription fulfillment system, a greater emphasis on marketing subscriptions, because now we're not just talking to United Church people and we know how to reach them, but how do you reach people who are going to share our values, who are beyond that group? So figuring out the marketing for trying to find our audience out beyond United Church. New strategies for donations and advertising, and several new staff members were brought on with the expertise to make it all work. I'm probably forgetting something, but that's kind of, it was quite a whirlwind few years, and things are starting to settle now. But yeah, it was quite a lot of changes.
And availability too, where you can get it now, right?
Yes,
subscription.
we got on the newsstand. We weren't, we had just a very small smattering on the newsstand before that, but we've, definitely on the newsstand a bit more now. So, yeah.
So people who might not know about it can maybe see it there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly at chapters. Yeah.
At where?
At Chapters Indigo would be
okay,
the most likely place you would find it.
Great.
Yeah.
And so, having made those changes, does it feel like your goals are being realized, or how's it going?
Yeah.
Having a couple of years in this.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, different metrics that I can look at. Subscriptions truthfully continue to decline, but not as quickly as before. And that's, in the world of print subscriptions, I call that a win. So we're kind of, slowing that down and giving ourselves more chance to figure out other ways to grow revenue. Donations are growing, and that's really exciting, especially online. We've seen a lot of growth of online donations. Our ad revenue took a hit with COVID, and we're trying to rebuild that now. And, just general digital engagements are really growing as we try new things online to bring an audience to our content. Anecdotally, I've heard from lots of people who love the magazine. They love the changes. They're so excited about what we're doing. And of course, there's some who decided that Broadview wasn't for them, and that's okay. And they moved on. But our business goal has always been about financial sustainability. And when I started into this job, for me, that was all about subscriptions. How do we get subscriptions? That's all, how do we get that number up and stop the decline in subscriptions? But now that I've been in this job for a few years, I'm realizing that in the magazine industry, very few magazines are winning on the print subscription front. But what they are doing is changing their business models and finding new ways to generate revenue. And so that they can keep producing the quality journalism that they want to do. So it's fascinating to watch what other publications are trying and seeing the innovations they're doing. And, we're pretty small, so we watch what they do and then we try to learn from them and try to grab the best ideas and scale them to our business and try to innovate from there. So that's how it's going. It's always, it's interesting, and it's there's kind of never a dull moment. I'd love a few weeks of dull moments actually, but basically there's never a dull moment. So
right. Well, you mentioned there's a number of metrics, ways you could measure how it's going, and one of the ways that I'm aware of is Broadview has been winning an incredible number of publishing magazine awards. Both you as an editor publisher, but also the magazine. And I thought I would rattle them off, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about the awards for, say, for 2021. It was a great year for Broadview.
Yeah, the awards all happen for magazines in the spring, and so we had all this great news come at us all, within the space of about 6 weeks or so. I like to call it our Triple Crown year because we won Best Magazine from the Canadian Christian Communicators Association, and that's Canadian-wide for faith-based or Christian publications. We won Best Magazine from the Associated Church Press, which is North America-wide. And then we won Best Special Interest Magazine from the National Magazine Awards. The National Magazine Award one was, that's a first for a faith-based publication, I'm sure, in their whole history. So that one felt like, to me, that one was the most exciting, but very happy about the other ones as well. But the awards, they're for work that we did in 2020. And so that means a lot to me because, of course, 2020 was the first year of COVID and everybody had to rush, get out of the office, grab your stuff and run kind of thing. And we all had to, remake, how did we do this? And so this very challenging year was the year that we did the kind of work that won us such a prestigious award. So that feels pretty good. But I also think it's interesting that we won both with the Christian press and with the secular press. And when we started this idea of creating Broadview, we want to definitely keep our Christian identity strong. But we also want to be as good a magazine as any magazine that you would find, on the newsstand. And so to me, if we have, we're recognized by the secular world and by the Christian press world, then that tells me that we're accomplishing our goals. So yeah, very pleased about the awards that we won this year.
Yeah. And we don't have time tonight to also list all of the writers awards in categories that were won as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's always exciting to see which ones really rose to the top.
Yeah, great to celebrate the writers for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned some of the challenges about publishing a periodical at this point in history. Do you want to say a little bit more about that for us? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious challenge for all legacy media like we are is that we are, as a society, I guess, in a very long transition between print only to digital only. And I think, eventually we will come to a time where we don't have print publications, but we're not there. So we're in this transition, we're in an in-between time, and everyone's trying to figure out what's the right, proportion of investment that you make into your print product versus your digital product. For us, our print subscriptions are still our biggest source of revenue. And we also just love print, and we love making a magazine because it's a beautiful thing to make. So that's still a very important part of what we do. And digital doesn't earn us a lot of money, but it does require a lot of investment to keep it current, especially with people's expectations. People are used to a really seamless transaction online, a very easy experience. And those things cost money to keep developing your site. So we try to be very, very efficient and smart about how we spend our digital development dollars. And we're always trying to find ways to bring some revenue through the digital platforms as well. So it's a constant learning curve. It's a constant you just got to try it and see if it works for you kind of approach, and experimental and entrepreneurial, which is kind of fun. But we, like I said before, we like to look at what other magazines, bigger magazines with deeper pockets are doing, and then we try to jump on the right bandwagon, I guess.
Well, and if subscription is still the main source of revenue, then you're doing very well, because I don't know what it is exactly right now, but I think it's an incredible value for what is it, 8 issues a year now, and $25 a year or something, or
Yeah, it's $29.95 unless you're part of a church group subscription, and it's $25. Yeah.
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 So pretty great deal. So were there, I don't know if this is fair question to ask the editor, but I'm going to ask anyway. Was there a standout story in 2021 so far, like one that you felt especially great about and would like to point to for us?
Yeah, it's sort of like choosing among your children, right? It's not fair, but
I know, that's what I thought.
which kid do you like the best? Be honest.
It's me, isn't it?
I feel closest to the ones that I edited myself. So I don't do the bulk of the editing of the features in the magazine. They've got a great team and they take care of it. But I do edit a feature every couple of issues. And so there's one that was a recent story called Leaving Christian Science. And I did edit that one. And the writer came to me, she was sort of thinking about writing a book, and it was, just a lot of ideas that are partially formed. And I helped her to bring that into a really great feature. So the title is Leaving Christian Science, but the story is actually about all the rigid and binary thoughts that we cling to when we talk about the body. So it's a personal story, and it's from a person who was raised in the Christian Science faith. In that faith, the body isn't real; only the spirit is real. So if their understanding is that if you feel pain or if you have a disease, those things are happening because your faith isn't strong enough. So the writer is now in her late 50s. And so she starts with this thinking about body and spirit and what's real for her. And then she goes through, her university years where she learned about capitalism and the idea that bodies are only worth what they can produce. And so how she struggled with that in conflict with her Christian Science upbringing. And then a little bit later in life, she gave birth to a son who has a rare genetic disorder. And then she started to encounter a lot of binary thinking around normal and abnormal bodies. So I really love this piece because it starts with a faith element, which is important for our readers and our brand, I guess. But really is about colliding worldviews, different perspectives, and how our ideas can evolve over time. So I thought it was a great piece, and I really loved working with the writer. Louise Kinross is the writer, so I really loved working with her on that.
It is a really great story. If people haven't seen it, it's worth flipping back to it. So I'm guessing that there are some people listening to the live stream or with us here on Zoom who would like to or who think they might have a story to share with Broadview. How does someone go forward with that?
Yeah, so the first thing you should do is go to our website, which is broadview.org, and you just scroll to the very bottom of the page and you'll see a link there. It says submission guidelines, and that really tells you everything that you need to know. So it's all in there, but I just want to add that, story ideas are definitely our bread and butter. Most of the ideas that we publish have come from people who just emailed us one day and said, hey, what do you think? And they're usually written by writers and journalists, but we also work with people who aren't, professional writers or journalists. So yeah, we're always looking for great ideas, good ideas, and we also pay fairly well and we pay on time. So if people are looking to make a living that way, then I think we're a good organization to work with.
Yeah, and that's probably worth mentioning is that there are a number of publications who are expecting writers to write for free. And I really have admired Broadview's faithfulness to the writers and the ethics practiced around that.
Yeah.
Well, I would be happy for you to really keep going for the rest of our time, but I want to get to the question about, what do you hope that people walk away from after reading an issue of Broadview? Like, how does Broadview storytelling challenge our understanding or the complexities of the world? It's a kind of general questions, but I think we'd like to hear what you sort of sit down and say, hope someone walks away from this with.
Yeah, we called it Broadview because we wanted to convey that we're a publication where you encounter a lot of perspectives on a lot of topics. So we hope that in every issue you'll encounter a perspective that you hadn't considered before. That there's something that challenges your own understanding. That you experience a shift in your thinking. You make a bit more space in your mind or in your heart for the other. And when I'm editing the pieces, that's my experience. That's what I love about it. That I think, oh, okay, I hadn't really, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. I hadn't really considered that person's opinion that I don't know, or that I hadn't considered that before. And so, some people don't like being nudged towards greater openness, but I think that people who read Broadview do want to grow in their empathy and their understanding. They want a better grasp of the things that motivate and concern people who aren't like them. And so they do seek out the stories that they find in Broadview. And, it's really, at the end of the day, it's about reaching across the silos and being open and empathetic and trying to make connections and, making the world a better place. It sounds sounds kind of cheesy, but I think I hope that that's what we're ultimately doing with our work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of sad that making the world a better place sounds cheesy in the world we live in, because I think that's a pretty damn good goal.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah, I think we'll put the broadview.org website in the chat so that people see it. Where else could people look, contact, what information if people want to get more information or subscribe, those kind of things?
Yeah, I think people just check out our website, broadview.org. There's a subscription button in the top right if you want to subscribe. And if probably the best places to find the print copy, if you just wanted a single copy, would be Chapters Indigo. So that's where it would be.
That's why I have a subscription.
Yeah.
Chapters Indigo is a long way away from me.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna switch roles now, and I'm gonna trust myself to Jocelyn's questions and talk a little bit about Billy Buffone.
Yeah. So I'm just going to formally introduce you first. So David Giuliano is an award-winning writer of fiction and nonfiction books, essays, and poems. His Postcards from the Valley, Encounters with Fear, Faith, and God was a Canadian bestseller. It's Good to Be Here, Stories We Tell About Cancer is David's spiritual memoir about his 20-year journey with cancer. He has also published 2 illustrated children's books. David lives with Pearl in Marathon, Ontario, on the North Shore of Lake Superior. And you can read more about David at davidgiuliano.ca. But we are here to focus on his new novel. So The Undertaking of Billy Buffone is a vivid portrait of lives intertwined in the search for redemption amidst the uncovering of dormant truths a small town tried to bury. It is a story of trauma, humor, and redemption. Catherine, a newly minted preacher, moves to 26 Mile House, an isolated community in Northern Ontario, and befriends the quirky undertaker Billy Buffone, who has a disturbing secret he has carried for almost 2 decades. Billy's best friend, now deceased, leads the reader through the traumatic events of today and those from the never forgotten past. So to begin, David is going to read a short passage from Billy Buffone.
Thanks, Jocelyn. I was thinking about what to read because there's sort of the ones that are traumatic, and there's ones that are parts of the book that are just kind of quirky and fun. But I was out today and the sun was shining, and I was thinking about Billy and Matthew as children. And Matthew is the narrator of the story. He's telling the story from life beyond this life, having died far too young. And is a victim of a Scout leader pedophile. But the story takes place sort of 1960 to 1975. And then in 1995, as the community deals with the trauma that was practiced in it for a long time. So I want to read this little piece about, it's from a chapter called My First Home, and it's chapter 5 in the book. And it's Matthew talking about his earliest memory of meeting Billy, and they're both just over toddlers. So in that earliest of my childhood memories of Billy and I, in the season of dandelions, I'm still wearing my pajamas and I'm walking across the front lawns on our side of Miles Street. I'm wearing socks, but no shoes. It must have been early in the morning because I remember the grass being thick with dew. My socks are wet. Through our neighbors' open windows, I can smell coffee and toast, can hear the clatter of breakfast tables being set. 3 yards down from ours, Billy is sitting on the wet grass in front of his house, basking in the early sun. He's wearing short pants and no shirt. His smooth legs are crossed in front of him. We called it sitting Indian style, never having made the connection to Pickerel River First Nation only 20 minutes from town. Billy's legs are already turning brown, even though summer is just starting. His belly is round. His eyes are closed. The drops of moisture glittering on the grass and the dandelions give the appearance that he is floating on a green pond of yellow lilies. A prayer bell of peacefulness encircles him. I'm drawn by the soundless bell toward him. I stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to notice me. I stepped closer, circled him. I got close enough to smell the baby shampoo in his hair. If he heard me approach, felt my breathing close by, he was undisturbed by my presence. His eyelids remained soft and closed, his eyelashes dark and full. His hand hovered over the cap of a single dandelion among the hundreds dotting our yards, allowing the slender yellow petals to touch the center of his palm. It must have tickled as his hand almost imperceptibly moved above the flower's golden crown. His eyelashes fluttered and his lips tipped up in a smile. I continued to watch him, waiting for his eyes to open. When they didn't open, I knelt down on the grass beside him, closed my eyes, and swept my hand around at my side. A dandelion caught between my fingers and was decapitated. I wiped its milky sap on my pajama pants. I winked an eye open to locate one particular flower and closed my eyes again. This time, I slowly lowered my hand until I felt the glowing energy of it in my palm. I was not so much touching the petals as sensing their warmth, cupping its life force in my downturned hand. It was as if light entered my hand, trickled up my arm, and spilled into the empty cavity of my chest. Tears rose in my throat and moistened my eyes. Some of the light from the flowers spilled out of my eyes onto my cheeks. The sound of my father's brewstering and slamming disappeared down a dark and closing hole. The cry of seagulls and the gentle morning surf down on the shore, and the warmth of the sun washed over me, over us. It was as if Billy and I were safe together in a sphere of serenity, a place defying words I didn't know then, nor have I found since. Something unspeakable held us, and in that moment we became best friends. It's difficult to say how long we sat there on the lawn, an hour, a minute. The mysticism of childhood defies the violence of chronological time. I learned later the Greeks called it this qualitative measurement of time, kairos time. By unspoken agreement, we simultaneously unshuttered our eyes. Billy smiled a sleepy smile, took my hand, led me along the warm concrete walkway to the back door of his house and into his mother's kitchen. And I'll stop there for right now. But something really beautiful about the mysticism of children.
Yeah, and you have such a way with description, and just such a vivid picture that you draw with your words. It's just so lovely to hear you read that. And of course, I read your book, and I grew up in Northern Ontario, and so when you just conjured this town, and I felt like, yeah, I feel like I've been there. Maybe I've been through that town, but of course it's a fiction. But that sort of leads into my next question: is Billy Buffone, is it based in real events?
Well, when I first came to Marathon here almost 35 years ago, in those days we had what was called settlement, where the national church matched you up with a little congregation somewhere, and you went and served there for a while, and usually left. I've stayed, but when I arrived, a man who had been the Reeve, a teacher, a scout leader, and an all-round stand-up guy in the community, had been charged and sentenced after 25 years of sexually abusing boys in the community. And so it kind of has a genesis in that story, but beyond that, it's really all fiction. I for many years I worked in the context of a community who was dealing with and not dealing with the collateral damage of that kind of trauma. And so I think at one time I thought I might write nonfiction about it. But in the end, I decided that those weren't really my stories to tell. And it was quite freeing in a way for me to begin to write without reference to actual events and those kind of things. So I'm pretty clear that it's 100% fiction, other than some of the markers of town and things where I live, but that's where I live. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I wonder if people in Marathon who remember the real life incident and the charges, if they've read your book, if they've found some, it's not factual, but they found some truth in what you've written.
Yeah, I've heard from a lot of people, and maybe a little shout out to the Marathon Public Library, who I think holds the record for selling 150 copies of the book in a town this size. I used to joke, and only half joking, that when it came out, I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to keep living here if people thought I was trying to say it was nonfiction. But it's been very positive response. Many people who have found it a way to talk about what went on here 35 years ago, and that they haven't spoken about since. And there are a few people, one in particular that I heard about last week, who told the librarian that she wouldn't read it because she felt that the man who had preyed on boys in our community hadn't really hurt anyone, and he was a good citizen, and she felt bad that she wasn't going to read the novel. And I thought, well, might be good for you too, but but more importantly, like, I'm really clear, I'm not writing about that individual and what happened. McLean's did a story on it years ago. You can find it online.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So your novel opens with some very vivid, hard to read passages about, a man who's a pedophile and is abusing young boys. Did you, what were you thinking when you're, creating your structure about starting there with that really hard stuff?
Well, you've said it more kindly. Other people have said, "What were you thinking?" but really, what it was I had an early reader, editor, who said, I was on page 67 before I realized what was going on. And so I started trying to kind of build some things into it. And I thought, wait a minute, this is what the story is about. And this is kind of how those events hit you if you're not in the know. Like, you're in a community and suddenly this news comes out. It's not like you've had 40 pages to build up to it, it's like quite wrenching to hear it. And I tried not to, make it so graphic that it was just sensationalized, but I also wanted it to feel real. Like sometimes the rest of the story doesn't make sense if we don't understand the level of trauma that was involved, and the kind of way that trauma can slip in under the guise of even being like, people don't always see it as a bad thing at first, and kind of tricked by it. But yeah, as far as moving it forward, I mean, there was a editorial reason, but even more a reason to say, yeah, it hits you like a brick when these tragedies and traumas happen.
That's true. We don't get to absorb them with, flashbacks and other pages of story and narrative unfolding, exposition. It's true. It shocks you right when it happens. So despite that fact, there's a lot of humor in the story, and some really great characters, and all the people dealing with a lot of complex things. So how did you find that balance between injecting some humor into a very serious topic?
Well, first of all, to say that I have heard from people that they appreciated that balance, and I'm glad that I managed to do that. You don't really know when you're writing it yourself whether it feels that way to the reader, but that was great. I knew from the beginning that in small towns there are quirky characters, and I don't know if there's more in small towns or just that you get to know them better, but there's that. And I knew from the beginning, like Billy Buffone, I named him that as Buffone means clown in Italian. And, as I'll make the point, I'm not talking about the creepy birthday party clowns. I'm talking about clowns that serve a function in society historically of reflecting back, like being a mirror that kind of distorts us and forces us to see things that we might not see. But yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of funny, and Catherine, the minister, I think it's in some ways loneliness sometimes causes us to take risks or behave in ways that kind of are funny for other people to observe that happening, and so she does that in the story as well. But yeah, it just seemed to me really important, even those who are the victims of Scout or Churley, that I presented them as three-dimensional. They're not tragic survivor. That's a character type, and but they're whole three-dimensional people who have other concerns and interests and those kind of things. So
yeah. Well, I felt the humor especially came out with Catherine, and her awkwardness, and her, there's a budding romance that happens in the novel, and her, feeling self-conscious of through that was just, I felt it with her, and I laughed a lot too. So that was great. There's also a strong element of Indigenous culture in your book. There's a community within the town of Indigenous people, and in these days it's hard for settler writers to write about Indigenous cultures and to want to be authentic. So what was the process for you there to make sure that you got that part right?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was probably the part of the novel that I probably felt most careful when I was writing it. Sometimes when you're writing, there's this fluid kind of free-flowing way of writing it. But as someone from the settler culture, I wanted to really move forward carefully and respectfully with those parts of the novel. And right from the beginning, I kind of questioned, what if I wrote it without an Indigenous presence in the story? Maybe I shouldn't be including that. Mm-hmm. And yet, being from Northwestern Ontario, and Marathon in particular, where our nearest neighbors are Indigenous people and many Indigenous people living in our community, it felt even more disrespectful to somehow pretend that isn't a big part of life in this part of the world. so I was careful about that. I was very grateful to Heather at Latitude 46, who was able to make arrangements with Nathan Adler, who is a Anishinaabe writer and novelist, who did a read before we, were ready to publish, and caught some things that, it's that balance of wanting to portray the non-Indigenous culture authentically, but also being careful about how that's written about. And finally, I was very careful to write from a settler's perspective and make that clear, like Catherine's reactions and her experience of engaging in that community. I don't try and tell Anishinaabe perspective or story. I mean, because those aren't mine to tell. But I certainly tried to be very respectful of the experience, and I've been there. That kind of feeling of what's the right way to be here, and I'm trying to be respectful, and I'm not always sure what that looks like, and so I kind of put that on Catherine to acknowledge those.
Yeah. Your past books were memoir. You've certainly written lots of nonfiction for Broadview and other places. This is your first novel. So I'm wondering how was that different, and what did you take from your experience of past writing in nonfiction into your writing in fiction?
Well, one of the things that that I had to kind of let go of is that nonfiction I write has always begins with the purpose. It begins with a point somehow. I think I've probably told you before that I find it easy to write if I get really angry about something, fired off. But it really took some work for me to welcome just the creative process of writing and allowing things to unfold in the way they do. And it was a beautiful thing. I mean, it's much of my spiritual practice now is that kind of being surprised by what comes and writing. So it's quite different that way. Yeah, and of course, long form. Whenever I wrote anything for Broadview, I always get the word count before I did anything because
There's no room.
I know, it's like, whoa, that's gone. And a great appreciation for editors, I would add. But yeah, that was part of the big one, is that kind of, and the idea that they might contribute something in spite of my not necessarily beginning with a point to be made. And yeah, I've really enjoyed exploring with fiction. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. Retired early so that I could do some writing fiction.
Yeah. And so, although you might not have gone into it with a point, what do you hope people will take away from their experience of reading, some challenging story, and very, very interesting and engaging one too? But what do you hope is a takeaway?
Well, I think first of all, that one of the things I noticed, the story that kind of inspired me or was the genesis for writing the one I've written, was that there was this idea that person went to jail, so it's all over, and we just, there's no impact in the community. And I want people to take away the recognition that it affects the whole community when that happens, in terms of the culture of the community, what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. The importance of being truthful. And one of the wonderful things about a small, isolated community like where I live is there's a high degree of acceptance of people who are different. Not always, but there can be. On the other hand, that means sometimes things that ought not to be accepted are accepted. And that allowed to go on from. So I wanted people to kind of have an idea of the collateral damage and how long it goes, but also the importance that healing happens through relationship and through community. People don't do that alone. And so particularly Catherine and Billy's relationship, but also Clarence's relationship with Billy, and there's the healing that he helps Billy with as well. And so there's that relational kind of healing. And I guess in a more philosophical way, that forgiveness, mercy, healing, those things happen and not necessarily all at once. Sometimes we have this idea that it's forgiven, and then you wake up the next morning and you think, wow, I don't feel so forgiven as I did yesterday. And sometimes we have to go through it a number of times before we're ready, but that it's the community and the relationship love that draws us into that place where we can experience some of that healing and mercy.
Beautiful. What's next for you? Are you going to write another novel, go back to some nonfiction? What's happening?
Well, I've finished the first draft of a second novel. Heather's on. Heather, it's not quite finished. I'm reluctant to pass it on to anyone until I feel pretty good about it. But I have, and I won't say much about it except it does take place in 26 Mile House, but it's more about an elderly couple. That's my discipline these days. Is mornings when I can make it possible is sit down and lose myself in the story that I'm writing.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. But where can people get a copy of The Undertaking of Billy Buffone?
Well, I mean, it's easy to Google The Undertaking of Billy Buffone and it'll show up in all kinds of stores. I would like to direct people to a link on my webpage down near the bottom. If you click on it, there's this new thing for independent bookstores that if you click on it, it'll take you to a page where you can put your postal code in, and it'll show you the independent bookstores that are near you. And if you look at them, you can even see if they have copies in stock, and if they don't, they can certainly get it for you fairly quickly. And of course, you can get it from Latitude 46. It's in their catalog online. And if you're a marathon, I think they got a couple of copies left at the library.
Well, you got to run, don't walk, because they're going like hotcakes in the marathon library. So that's great.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
It's a bestseller in marathon.
Yeah. I think that's the end of the questions I had. So maybe Heather, there you are. Come on back.
Hello, I'm back.
Any other questions?
That was an excellent conversation, and certainly stimulated some questions for myself. And I've read lots of both of your work. So does anybody throw up your questions either in the Q&A or in the chat? And David and Jocelyn are very happy to answer them. Oh, and Susan Ivany bought a copy of The Undertaking of Billy Buffone in the brand new indie bookstore called Entershine Books in Thunder Bay. So happy to support.
Last time I checked, they had one left.
Okay. I'll expect an order for more.
Reprint. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any more? Okay, well, we're not seeing any any questions here, so.
Well, we
Right.
must have just answered them all so well, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there's someone in the Q&A
Okay,
who
we have
is
one.
going
Yay.
to type a question. There we go.
I have one. 1 second to type it, please. Okay.
And I just also want to acknowledge the comment from Rick Brown, who says he struggles with bipolar himself and could relate to the story. I assume you mean from my grandmother's illness story. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad it resonated with you.
All right, well, I can ask a question. David, when did you actually start writing this story? What was sort of the moment that you decided I need to tell this story? And did you have it sort of encapsulated that you knew, okay, this is the end. I'm not sure I'm going to get there, but this is the story I have to tell.
Well, like I think a lot of fiction writers, oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
We're good.
Oh, I saw you motioning and I wasn't sure if you could hear me. I was looking at the live stream and saying hi to Rod Carley. Like a lot of novels, it spent a lot of time in the bottom drawer of a desk. I think I first started writing it when I was taking a clinical pastoral education program. And that was when I was writing it more as nonfiction, trying to work through some of the people I was working with who had been victims or were related to victims. But it was when in 2017, when I actually retired, that I started dedicating myself, because a lot of people, I love Margaret Atwood's story about, people always come up to her at parties and say, I'm a brain surgeon, but when I retire, I think I'm going to write a novel. And she always says, yeah, when I retire from writing novels, I think I'll be a brain surgeon. But it is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time to sit down. I will never calculate the minutes it spent writing versus the financial rewards of writing novels. But if I didn't enjoy it so much, I wouldn't. But there really is that just the hours that it takes to do it well. And for me, when I was struggling, I often said, I'm learning how to write fiction. So this is just, me trying to learn how to do this. And that helped me kind of motivate that I don't have to get it right or perfect or those kind of things, and learning as I go. And
just
I
to
did
note
learn a
too,
lot doing it.
you went to Humber School of Writers and
Yes,
worked with
I
a very
did.
good award-winning
David Bergen. Yeah, Humber has a program where you get set up with a mentor relationship with a writer, and I worked with David Bergen on some chapters early on. I bet if I'd been further along, he could have been even more helpful to me. But yeah, and I attended 3 or 4 workshops at the Collegeville Institute of Writing, and they helped me launch there, and the Halliburton School of Fine Art, a couple of writing courses there. But yeah, I forget what you asked me.
How long ago?
How long did you have it?
Yeah. All right, so we have the question. How do you go about ensuring an accurate and sensitive voice in your books, victims' voices? David, do you interview people, read stories? Wondering about steps taken to write such sensitive material. Thanks. And there's a second part. And how do you separate yourself from it? Do you need time to process what you write? How do you separate yourself from it? Good question.
All right. Well, let me roll back to research. I think is really important, and I often I do a draft, but I always go back and do fact checking and things like that, and I read about whatever I'm writing about. But in the case of victims, I think I was able to write somewhat authentically about the experience of the boys who were traumatized, because I did work with boys or men who had been abused as boys over the years as a minister, but was very careful not to like, I think any one of them could have read it and not felt like, oh, that was me. But the kind of emotional diversity that people have. People don't have the same experience or same reaction to those experiences. So, and as far as separating myself from it, I'm not like, I mean, I write best when I'm actually immersed in what I'm writing. I try and connect deeply with it more than to separate from it. I suppose there's times when I need to, like, mainly I go for a run or a bike ride or something, and thoughts and process happens there sometimes. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly. If I'm not, ask it again.
I think you did answer it.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Jocelyn a question. So sometimes being the publisher is difficult to find the stories that you want to be told through Broadview. And so how many submissions do you get, or do you need to kind of go out and tap people to write them?
Well, we get a lot of submissions, and we have the luxury of being able to choose the stuff that really excites us. If we think, oh my gosh, I want to read that, then that's the story. But we also, we have kind of writers that we know we can rely on. David's certainly one of them. People like, your go-to stable of writers that, we can say, sometimes I just say, hey, what do you want to write for us next? Go to my favorite writers and ask that question. What are you thinking about these days? What's on your mind? Let's chat, and let's see where we can go with something. So we'll work that way. But then, diversity of voices is really important to us. And so we make a concerted effort to reach out to diverse communities, whether they're ethnically, racially diverse, people who are disabled, people who are young, people who are a lot older, just, all kinds of different, gender orientation, so on. So in those cases, people aren't necessarily going to maybe think of Broadview first when they have an idea. They might be more inclined to go to a more specific to their community type of publication. So we do quite a bit of outreach with diverse writers, trying to find them on Facebook and Twitter and start chatting with them and saying, hey, I love your stuff. Would you consider pitching for us? And here's what you need to know. So yeah, that, and we're all reading the news and keeping tabs on things and trying to really know, this is an issue that we've got to cover, and especially online, things are happening that are in our wheelhouse, and we need to have something said about those topics. And so we assign, writers that we know will do a great job on given topics. So.
And so what topics are those for you? What do you really wish would come in because you want, to have it a part of Broadview?
Yeah. I mean, right now we're looking for great Easter stories. I know it's a ways away, but it's always tricky with the occasions that come up every year. We want to hit Christmas, we want to hit Easter as a Christian publication. So trying to find a fresh, really great Easter story is on my mind today. But in general, our editorial pillars are spirituality, and we understand that from a progressive Christian perspective, social justice stories, ethical living stories. That's kind of where we're looking. And yeah, so anything that kind of, there's a very broad, those are very broad topics. So things under those umbrella terms are basically what we're looking for.
So you probably want some pieces around reconciliation. Is that something that?
Yeah, and we run lots of things around reconciliation, and always looking for, in particular, Indigenous writers writing from their perspective on those topics. Absolutely.
Great. All right. Let me just see if there's another
I
question.
see a question from Susan here in the chat.
Okay.
Susan, is that Susan Ivany? Hi, Susan. I'm wondering, David, if you have any suggestions for writing discipline for those of us still working. How do you carve out the time for writing when the weekly word count is already pretty high for sermon writing? And I do have experience with that. First of all, I'll say some of my stuff that I would offer to see if Broadview was interested came out of sermons, where maybe there's an aspect of it that I wanted to explore more deeply. And so I did that. As far as discipline goes, one of the things David Bergen told me when he wrote his first novel in the front seat of his station wagon while driving his kids to activities. So it really humbled me in terms of I have to have everything right where I'm, sit down and write. But I think one of the great things in ministry is that we have a lot of flexibility in how we spend our time, or at least I did. Maybe it's different in a larger place, but I would always dedicate at least a morning a week when I wrote, and I put it in my calendar, and it was just like anything else that I had. I can't say I always was able to achieve that, but it's valuing it and recognizing that it's helpful. That makes a big difference. But I hear you. I mean, I retired so I could write regularly. It is, for me, it's I've always needed a block of time. I'm not someone who can fire things off in 15 or 20 minutes. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I certainly know it, and making it part of my work day or my regular morning off or something to do it made a big difference.
Great. I think there's a question here for Jocelyn. Mary Reed says, thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm glad to listen to all you have said. I'm greatly interested in rurality. A group of us attempted to write a feature story for Broadview, and we were rejected. After listening tonight, I know we'll try again. I have not given up on our little church project. We felt we were not accepted, in part because we were down home country people. I would like both your reactions to what it takes to be published and remain in your own shoes in terms of the content.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mary, I don't remember which story you're referring to, so I can't comment on the reason you were rejected. So I apologize for that. Just know that we reject more than we accept. And so it's not that it's not a good story or a worthy story. It's that we're looking for the things that make us stop on our tracks and that we think will be very interesting to people across the country, very unique, and something that will stop them in their tracks. So it's kind of, it's not a science. There's not, here's the 10 things, and if you get all 10 of these things, then we'll definitely publish your story. Sometimes it's a matter of how much space we have and how much budget we have too. So sometimes, it would be a good story on a regular day, but right now we're really tight for space. And so we're just saving that one last space for something that we think is really strong. So yeah, I've I don't like turning people away, good people with good stories, but that is part of my job. So just trying to use the resources that we have and the space that we have to produce the best things that we can find. So I hope it wasn't because you're country people. I mean, we've published lots of things about rural, this, I'm going to move this way. There's a story about migrant workers on farms right on our cover right there. So anyway, email me again, remind me what it was, and if you'd like a better explanation. I also don't always have time to give people explanations for why we can't accept their story. So often I just say, sorry, no. And but if you feel like you would like a better explanation, I can try to provide that if you jog my memory for me.
And
From a writer's point, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just also, as a writer, I was a freelance journalist for many years, and did lots of pitching to magazines and newspapers, and it's just part of the process. There's way more rejection than there is acceptance, and you just need to keep forging ahead. And sometimes when you do get an editor who provides some feedback, that's great, because then it just depends on the magazine or the newspaper in terms of what they're looking for at that moment when you pitch. So
yeah,
keep trying.
I can point out a few things from the writer's point of view. I can begin by saying that Jocelyn rejected my last pitch. And I understood why. That one of the things is that I'm aware that a magazine like Broadview, probably, what would you get, 100 times more pitches than you can use? Would it be that many, Jocelyn?
Probably more like 10 times. So every
Okay.
week we go through the story ideas as a team that we think are some of them get rejected outright, I'll admit, but the ones that we think are worth talking about, we bring them to the team meeting, and then even then, like, sometimes we just say no to all of them because they just don't grab the team. So it's hard.
So as a writer, I'm aware that when I send something, I'm in the company of 10 other excellent writers who are pitching something, and one of them will find a place in the magazine. Also, like, there's a whole process of trying to put together a whole package, and I might have a good article, but it doesn't go with the whole package, or the balance of what's trying to happen there. And so I think what Heather said is so true. There are more. I'm sorry, what's the line? Unfortunately,
we're not interested.
Yeah, well, they always find a nice way to say that,
Yeah.
but and it's not personal, and it's like, I mean, I would never assume it has to do with where I live or whatever, but there has to be a broad view, a broad interest, and
and we don't always get it right. Sometimes we say yes to a story, and then it turns out that it wasn't as exciting as we thought, and sometimes we say no to a story, and then we see it published in another publication a few months later, and we say, shoot, so we had a chance at that one and we missed it. So it's not a sign.
Definitely. All right, and let's take one more question, and this is for Jocelyn. Would you ever consider including artwork, poetry, pieces, pages in your magazine? I love it as it is, so more just curious.
I'm not sure what you mean by artwork, poetry, pieces, pages. I guess, if you mean poetry, I mean, there's lots of artwork in the magazine. It's usually commissioned to go with an article. Maybe if you meant standalone artwork. Not really. It's usually attached to words and story. And poetry, we would do occasionally run a poem, but We're more interested in journalism than poetry and fiction for that matter in the magazine. I love fiction as an aside, but for the magazine, it's more nonfiction journalism than poetry. So sometimes, like, we had a piece that was a photo essay about a Indigenous woman who did a journey with her friends to Kamloops and Cowessess to commemorate the children who were the remains of children who were found on those sites. And as part of that photo essay and her telling of the story, she also wrote a poem, which we published. But generally, we aren't looking for poetry except on occasion. That answers the question.
Just as a side note, Walrus Magazine right now is looking for 13 to 18-year-olds, art, poetry, and stories.
Yeah, great opportunity.
It sure is for a young person.
And Reich Brown has asked, is it better to submit an idea or a complete article?
An idea. Always an idea first. We don't, then I feel even worse if I have to reject it. Somebody's gone to all the trouble. No, better to submit the idea. And if you go to the submission guidelines that I mentioned, there's some guidelines that help you to craft your idea so that it speaks to what we're looking for. And so definitely idea first. I mean, if you've already got an article written for some reason, then sure, send it. But I would say idea first so that you don't spend a lot of time crafting something and then feel extremely disappointed when if it's rejected. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's the last of the questions. I didn't see any come up on Facebook. But this has
Heather,
been go ahead.
Can I make one quick comment in the presence of two people who've both edited me? Writers, be grateful for a good editor. A lot of times there's this feeling like, oh, they cut something that, and someone told me years and years ago, the sign of a good writer is the appreciation of a good editor. And as for a writer, we can get pretty stuck on what we've written, and it takes some experience to step back and be able to look at it and say, yeah, that is better than what I wrote. And even if it's not, that's their job, not mine. So
well, and you actually ended up working with, two editors, and then with Nathan, who didn't necessarily edit, but editorial comments.
Yeah.
So and you
yeah,
were
and
great.
I appreciate them. Yeah.
And quality product in the end.
Yeah, I feel like that's a sign of a good writing relationship, is to recognize the improvements that editors make on what we write.
Yeah, it's I always find it interesting, the amount of work that goes into a book, and it may only take you a couple of days or hours even to read it, but the impact that it has is why I publish, is because it just has a resounding impact for people when we tell stories, which is what our conversation was all about.
Nice pulling it together there, Heather. That's excellent.
Full circle. I like it.
So again, thank you so much. I thought this was absolutely wonderful, and you can again get Broadview magazine definitely at Indigo Chapters, and I think you might be able to get it at Ben McNally's, and the Undertaking of Billy Buffone. Order it, or even go into the bookstore. They might have a copy there, and of course, Latitude 46 online bookshop always has copies. So thank you so much. And